In all of science fiction, one of my favorite types of troop has got to be drop troopers, ranging anywhere from the elite and badass ODSTs of Halo to the cheap and expendable Helldivers. I mean, invincible and dauntless Helldivers for Super Earth. In any case, the term drop troops has many possible styles depending on how suicidal you want them, but sadly in the case of my Space Marine Army Space Wolves, I don't much feel like sourcing, building, and painting a whole load of jump pack lads, but this is where I believe that the drop pod, Captain of Gondor, shows its quality. With a pod, any of my Space Marines can be drop troops. Do I want a squad of beefy blade guards to engage tough threats in melee? In the pod! A squad of shotgun-toting scouts to take pot shots at a horde of rushing nids before they get absolutely clobbered? In the pod! The local furry convention? In the pod! Maybe not that one. But moving on, I believe it is the perfect middle ground for wanting lots of drop troops, but still being able to use your bog standard infantry that you will undoubtedly have lots of if you get any sort of beginner box. But they are still almost $70 a piece, and I don't really have that cash lying around, but you know the rest, yada yada, Games Workshop is expensive, womp womp, I 3D printed one off. Arming myself with an X-Acto blade, I begin cleaning all of the 3D printed parts. I scrape off any large imperfections and misprints, and then sand down the surfaces that will be glued together. With the parts nicely cleaned, it is now time to use my worst enemy, super glue. I apply it to the surfaces that will be joined, and then carefully try to fit them together, taking care to make sure that the edges line up properly. I now have all the doors assembled, so I plug any gaps that may have appeared using some thinned down Tamiya putty. I now have all the doors assembled, however I snapped off one of the pegs required to make the doors actually open earlier in the process, so I repair it now with a length of toothpick. To do this, I drill a small pilot hole using a 1mm drill bit. I then widen this pilot hole using the sharp point of my hobby blade, which I can then glue the toothpick end into. Putting this new peg to use, I begin slotting the doors into the spots on the drop pod main body. Now, unfortunately, while I was gluing the top panel on, one of the pegs of the rear doors accidentally slipped out. Now, despite this being a clear case of operator error that caused me to have to break open the drop pod again to fix the issue, it was definitely the superglue's fault. Despite my previous failings, we now have something that's looking more and more like the fun toy I had envisioned. I will now demonstrate this by playing with some of my Space Marines from the Leviathan box set. Anyway, now that the drop pod bottom is complete, it is now time to move on to building the top fin portion. The way that this top fin portion is put together is that all the fins attach to the central turbine section. So we'll start by assembling that, then putting all the fins together fully because they come in two parts, and then attaching that to the bottom drop pod body. After completing the top fin section, I then introduce both sections together using some superglue. I will then begin the process of magnetizing all the doors. I do this just to give it a little bit more stability and also to prevent the doors from falling out while I carry this thing around. And with the final magnet placed, the drop pod is complete. Now moving on to painting, I will give the entire thing a base coat of a Vallejo German Field Grey, and then give it a nice blast from Citadel's White Scar.
zenithal highlight complete, I will now switch to the painting perspective, and then use my airbrush to apply a nice coat of Fenrisian Grey. Also, I'd just like to say sorry, I'm playing Space Wolves here and painting up a drop pod for the chapter, and I haven't been calling it a wolf drop pod this entire time, so forgive me. For the rest of the video, I will correct my mistake. With the Fenrisian Grey applied, I will now use some masking tape to mask off the central engine bit. I will then blast this with some nice grey and then dry brush some metallic over top. I have a plan, Arthur. Using the masking tape once more and grabbing my safety scissors like a good boy, I will mask off the top of the fins so that I may paint them red. So for those of you watching who are thinking, that looks like awfully little masking for how much I'm spraying red all over the place, I'd just like to point out that you are wrong. I definitely did not splash any red on the rest of the model. With all my basic colors blocked in, and before I start weathering, it is now decal time. So cutting out just a couple basic Space Wolf logos, I will then use my decal solutions to apply one to each door. Please don't point out that you can't actually see the Space Wolf logo when the doors are open. I don't want to hear it. With the decals put on, I will now try my hand at chipping. Now, I am not very good at chipping, but I think this turned out pretty good. I used a stiff brush to stipple on grays leading up to brown on any raised sections and on the edges of any plates. After applying some targeted washes, I will then use my airbrush to give the impression that this thing has fallen through the atmosphere. I do this by just putting in some thin black and spraying it from the bottom. It is funny how much joy this little piece of 3D printed plastic can give me. That is honestly one of my favorite things about 3D printed models. It is just some low stakes fun. Sometimes I find when I'm painting up my Games Workshop plastic, I can kind of feel a bit stressed out to not mess it up in any way, but with this little thing, it was nice to just kick back, relax, and paint it. Thank you all so much for watching. This video took quite some time to come out, mostly because I'm lazy, but there were some other factors to that. But anyway, happy belated Thanksgiving, and I hope to see you in the next one.